Well, that Munich Security Conference is underway in Germany with some high-profile issues on the agenda. Hundreds of world leaders and diplomats are discussing a range of topics, focusing on conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine. On the agenda today, corruption and how it relates to the war on terror. Our next guest authored a report on that topic, and his report was the basis for today's panel discussion. Mark Pyman is the program director of Transparency International's Defense and Security Program, and he joins us now from Munich. Mark, good to have you with us.
Good afternoon to you. Pleasure to be.
Yeah, it is good to talk to you, especially on this topic, and so timely. So this security conference is really focused on the war on terror. What exactly is the link between corruption and terrorism?
There are two or three very big and very direct links. The first one is recruitment and radicalization. If you think of Tunisia, or even if you think of Paris earlier this year, a lot of young people with no prospects and no jobs, and the system rigged against them very directly by corruption. It's one of the principal sources of recruitment for terrorist recruits. The second is funding. A lot of their money comes from organized crime, or it comes from rich patrons, and in many cases both of these are very highly integrated with corrupt sources of money. But the third one, which is the most practical and the most visible, is what you might call corrupt services. Terrorists need weapons, they need passports, they need access, they need security passes. All of these come actually very easily by very modest payments of money. And that's probably the biggest single source.
You know, it's interesting the way you lay it out there in those three scenarios. I wonder, though, when you talk about corruption, what specifically are you referring to?
It's one of those words that everybody feels they understand, and indeed you do, but it covers a multitude of different things. We think of it really simply as three big things. The first two, actually the Afghans speak of it really well. They call them need and greed. Need is very simple. If I have to pay a bribe to get my daughter to hospital, I'll pay it. If I have to pay a bribe to get my child into school, I'll pay it. Need is very comprehensible, very real, and the principal issue for people on the street. Greed is what it says. It's people taking millions of dollars, often in contracts or in special access deals. The third is where the link to terrorism really comes in as well, which is what you might call state subversion or state capture, when people are directly using corruption as a means of destabilizing the country or as a means of preventing emergence from conflict or fragility. So those are the three things: need and greed and state subversion.
And I understand that you have actually just come from a panel discussion on all of that, on corruption. What was the main message that you took away from that meeting?
Well, the biggest message of today actually came not from that panel, but from US Vice President Joe Biden, who was speaking a little earlier in the afternoon. And he was speaking in part on Ukraine, and he devoted probably a third of his talk to the way corruption damages democracies and development and progress. And his language was, corruption is kryptonite, to use the cartoon analogy. And he was speaking directly of the way that Ukraine was both suffering from corruption, but more directly, its progress was being subverted by all sorts of corrupt mechanisms from overseas.
And I'm sure you could lead that, Mark, into other operations, attacks that have happened around the world, how corruption was related. Moving forward, though, how do you solve the problem of corruption?
Well, in relation to terrorism, I mean, you solve the problem of corruption by cutting it into smaller, slightly more manageable pieces. So if we take the issue of terrorism, the first point is, if you have a corrupt security force and you have a corrupt military, either nationally or internationally, then you've already lost the war against terrorism, because you cannot withstand terrorism if your own forces are actively participating in it. You can do a lot with military and security forces. The example being discussed in this conference here was Poland, did a tremendous amount of reform of their military. There's a good place to start. The second is with the policymakers, and there it's a generational thing. Older policymakers have got used to corruption being almost a signature theme of the Cold War, whereas today's younger diplomats see it for much more for what it is, a really damaging virus. So working with those younger policymakers, actually it's a much easier call to set up and initiate all the measures that you need against terrorism.
Well, Mark, I've got to say it is a fascinating topic, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share your insight with us. Much appreciated.
With pleasure. Happy to continue anytime.
Mark Pyman, Program Director of Transparency International's Defense and Security Program, and he was speaking with me from Munich.